On this slide, I want you to know that there's a superior, middle, and inferior trunk to the brachial plexus. Now, this is the group of nerves arising from the cervical spine to supply the upper extremity. Also, note over here, lateral cord, posterior cord, and medial cord. And this is because there's an axillary artery going through here, and these are named according to the position in relation to that artery. So you've got the lateral cord, this one would be behind, posterior cord, and medial cord. The rest of this, keep in mind, but we'll look at this more later. The spinal nerves and plexuses on the hand, I want you to know this figure inside out. It's fairly easy. Just think about it. The ulnar bone is over here on the pinky side. That would be the ulnar nerve. The radial nerve is on the radial side. And the only thing different is the radial nerve supplies the hand posteriorly. The median nerve supplies the hand anteriorly, or on the ventral side. So keep this in mind. These are some of the major nerves of the lumbar plexus. The ventral rami. So if they're ventral, they would be muscular, right? Just know these terms. It could be on a multiple choice. Genitofemoral. All of them have femoral in them, like lateral femoral cutaneous, femoral, except this one, obturator. And remember, there's an obturator in the pelvis, down on the os coxa by the ischial tuberosity area. That opening is called the obturator foramen. So just know those names of the lumbar plexus major nerves. And here's what it would look like. Just a picture. I don't expect you guys to know the foot, but do know that the largest nerve, and it's out of the sacral plexus, the sciatic nerve, comes out of, you figured it, the greater sciatic notch. Right here, if my pointer will work. So the greater sciatic notch, the sciatic nerve comes out, goes down, separates into the tibial nerve, which goes along the tibia, and the common fibular nerve, which wraps around the fibula. So the sciatic nerve divides into two, tibial and common fibular. Make sure you know that. This is talking about the lumbosacral plexus. Take a quick look at that. For some of you, you may want to look at this drawing. Just remember the peroneal nerve over here. Right here, you've got the tibial. That would be the common fibular now. But you might like that drawing instead. Major nerves of the sacral plexus. Basically, there's two, pudendal and sciatic. But the big one that most people talk about is the sciatic. And the branches of the sciatic are the fibular and tibial. Common fibular and tibial. And just another picture of that. This is the sacral plexus with the sciatic nerve. This slide talks about the sensory neurons, about 10 million, motor neurons, 500,000, and the big picture, interneurons, 20 billion. Interpretation, planning, coordination of signal in and out. Spinal reflexes we will get into. You have what are called monosynaptic, which means they're just one synapse. polysynaptic, more than one synapse. So on a simple, on this, you can actually see this is another view of a flexor reflex. Let me go back. To a very simple reflex. When there's a pain input, you have 1, 2 connections, and it goes on both sides. So it would be contralateral, indicating that it goes on both sides. Now, if it were to stay on the same side, it would be ipsilateral. This is a diagram with the different types of reflexes. These are by development. They're either genetically or developmentally determined. So a baby suckling on a bottle would be innate reflex. An acquired reflex, for instance, would be you putting on your foot on the brake pedal when you come to a stoplight, or learning how to, if somebody throws a ball at you, to catch it. That would be acquired reflex. Somatic reflexes are skeletal muscle contractions, so that would be a deep tendon reflex. Visceral reflex, smooth cardiac muscles. So if you start walking really fast and your heart speeds up, trying to pump more blood. Now over here it's talking about monosynaptic, which is one synapse, which is pretty rare in my opinion, or polysynaptic, which is multiple synapses of the axons. You also have cranial reflexes, processes in the brain. So if you touch someone's eye, they will blink. That would be a cranial reflex. If you look into someone's eye with a flashlight and the other side actually constricts with the bright light, that would be a cranial reflex. And spinal reflex is a process in the spinal cord. This goes over the acquired reflexes, somatic and visceral reflexes some more. So you could pull this up on your PowerPoint as well. In fact, follow me on this as a small, while you're looking at the PowerPoint, in a small box beside it. This will talk about the monosynaptic, called a stretch reflex when you tap the knee. That is actually called a patellar reflex. So it's a stretch reflex or patellar reflex because there's a muscle spindle that gets stretched that causes the reflex. That muscle spindle, I will show you a picture of it here in a second. So know this picture. The inside right here, the fibers on the inside of this whole thing, which is called a muscle spindle, but the inside fibers are intrafusal. That makes sense. The outside fibers are extrafusal. So know that. Basically what happens is when you do a deep tendon reflex or somebody taps your knee with a reflex hammer, it'll stretch this right here. This causes that muscle to reflex against the stretching that had just happened. And this is basically to save the muscle from being stretched too far. This is more of a complex, well actually this is a very simple reflex arc. So you got the stretch reflex, the little muscle spindle being stretched with the intrafusal and extrafusal fibers, going up into the dorsal root ganglia where the cell bodies are, going into the gray horns, synapsing on one synapse and then going right back out to the muscle to make the muscle contract. This is a stretch reflex. There's actually more to it than just this, but to keep it simple, a stretch reflex would be monosynaptic, one synapse, and it would be ipsilateral. Polysynaptic reflexes can be more complicated. We're going to go over that next. Another name for polysynaptic, depending on what type it is, we're going to talk about a withdrawal reflex. Withdrawal reflex. A flexor reflex is a withdrawal reflex affecting the muscles. And for this to happen, you have to have what's called reciprocal inhibition, where the stretch, right, there's a stretch of the muscle, the opposite muscle has to relax. So when you tap the biceps, which would be the agonist, it will contract. And in order for that to contract, the antagonist, which would be the triceps, has to be relaxed. And this process is called reciprocal inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition. We're also going to talk about what's called a crossed extensor reflex. This complements a withdrawal reflex, a little bit more complicated. Here's a flexor reflex. It also is a withdrawal reflex, so you're withdrawing your hand because it hurts. It is, according to this diagram, 1, 2, 3, it's more than one synapse, so it's polysynaptic. According to this picture, it's on one side, so it's ipsilateral. If it were to go across to the other side, over here, it would be a contralateral. It makes the flexor work. The extensor is inhibited, so that is called reciprocal inhibition. So on this slide, you have polysynaptic, ipsilateral, same side, and you have reciprocal inhibition going on at the same time. And this whole thing is called a flexor reflex. Now look at this. The whole diagram is a crossed extensor reflex. But if you think about it, it is in multiple parts. If we stay on this side, the right side, go all the way up, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's polysynaptic. And on just this side, it's ipsilateral, meaning it's on the same side. And you have a flexor reflex and a withdrawal reflex. Watch this again. Go over it again. On this side, going across, it crosses over the central part of the canal or the spinal cord. So now it is polysynaptic as well, contralateral because it's going to the opposite side, and this is different than the upper extremity because if you lift the leg on the right, you have to push the leg down on the left so you don't fall down. So this is an extensor reflex over here, and the reciprocal inhibition is to the flexor. It says it right here. Extensor reflex, basically, and the flexors are inhibited. So this is reciprocal inhibition, along with this being reciprocal inhibition. This side, don't forget, it's a withdrawal. It's a flexor reflex. This is an extensor reflex, and that's why they call it a crossed, because it crosses over, extensor reflex. But on a test, I can ask you, what is this side